Welcome back to Homesteading with the Zimmermans, where we work hard and play hard on our little corner of land in Iowa. My husband and I were born and raised Old Order Mennonite, or horse and buggy Mennonite, as some refer to them as. And although we are no longer part of that culture or community, we are intentional about passing on the old-fashioned skills of our childhood to the next generation.
Keep on watching me get.
Here, will you take the wash bucket?
No, I take it.
Are you gonna take the wash bucket?
That's
Lids in one jar.
oh, 2 lids in 2 jars.
Okay.
No, she took 1 jar.
All right.
This one is. This one is Boots.
That's Boots.
Yeah. And
And I took it a bucket a while. Get a bucket a while. Please.
To the
so
faucet.
maybe I have to start picking the hose in the.
You see how fuzzy she's getting? Any eggs?
No.
Okay, let your light on. Wait, here, I want to show you something. So, I got this.
Foot thing. in here.
No, I was going to ask Dad about getting a rug to put inside the door.
There's gonna be poop on the rug then.
On what?
On the rug.
Yeah.
When you're done, just back up out of the screen and do this. And then I'll turn it off. Better hurry up, Mom. And it's 28, 26, I'll be in the double digits.
And then you can take that half-gallon jar. Yeah. But,
Here's what did you do? And then everybody said no, it wasn't really like that. It was like that for like years. It was ripped for years.
oh.
Well, as long as he had it.
Good morning, friends. Ruth Ann Zimmerman here for Homesteading with the Zimmermans. And in today's video, I am going to be making cheese curds. Now, this is not an aged cheese. And I think that if you're interested in making cheese at all, this is a great, great place to start because these cheese curds get eaten fresh and not aged, but the process is very, very much the same as making aged cheese. But instead of, putting them in your cheese cave and aging them, you eat them fresh. So you get the feel for cheese making without having to wait, 6 months to try it when you get it out of your cheese cave. So I don't normally make a lot of cheese in the summertime just because we are so busy. And the other reason is we are bringing a lot of fruits and veggies into the house from the garden. And so the opportunity to get my cheese contaminated is pretty high during harvest season. So I usually take a pretty long break. July, August, September, I don't usually make cheese while I'm canning and preserving. But now that we are headed back into winter, I'm going to be starting my cheese making again, and I'll probably make at least one batch of cheese a week until our cheese cave is stacked. And then that'll get us through. And then I'll just make, a wheel here and there as I have extra milk. So my goal is to make 5 to 10 pounds of hard cheese a week. But this week, I'm just going to make cheese curds, and I might still, if we're bringing 3-4 gallons of milk to the house each day, I might still end up making a wheel of hard cheese towards the end of the week. But today, I'm going to show you how to make cheese curds. And like usual, I underestimated the size of the pot I would need, and I thought I knew how much milk I was bringing to the house, but that's okay. Some of this cream has already started rising to the top, so I'm just going to take some of this cream off because my pot is entirely too full of milk. I would just make a mess if I leave it this full. So I'm just going to scrape some of the cream off. And so my milk right now is sitting at like 84 degrees. You can make these cheddar cheese curds with whole milk. That's not an issue. But my pot's too full. So that's why I'm taking the cream off. Oh my. Okay, now my cream container is full. So I'm just going to mix this in. So normally when I bring the milk in from the barn, it's right around 90 degrees, which is exactly where I want it to add my rennet. But because this morning was a little chilly, it's like 29 degrees outside, and I waited to start this until the kids were off to school. It has dropped to like 82 degrees. So I'm just going to turn this on low and bring it up to 90 degrees. If you are using milk that's already chilled, just bring your temperature up to 90 degrees. Bring it up slowly so you don't scorch the bottom. If you're using pasteurized milk to make your cheese curds, it's entirely possible. You just need one extra ingredient, and that is calcium chloride. So what happens when milk is pasteurized, it destroys the minerals in it that helps it coagulate. So you have to add calcium chloride to your milk, and you do that before you start heating it. So if this were pasteurized milk, I would have added the calcium chloride a couple hours ago, and probably right when I brought it from the barn. Which that doesn't make sense, because if I brought it straight from the barn, it's going to be raw. But here's the thing. You need to add calcium chloride to your pasteurized milk, and you do it before you start heating it. And you take 1/4 teaspoon of calcium chloride per gallon of milk. So this is 2 gallons. So I would need 1/2 teaspoon of calcium chloride, and I would put that calcium chloride in about 1/4 cup of water and dissolve it in there and mix it in before I add it to this. So, and then the process from then on out is the same as from what I'm going to show you. So if you would have added your calcium chloride, you'd be right where I am now. And that's another difference with, if this were an aged cheese, I would have had to add a culture to it to get the acid levels right. But because we're not aging this, I don't need to add a culture. I can just go straight to adding the rennet and the coagulation. So this is now at 87. I'm going to bring this up a little bit so it's not resting at the bottom. On the bottom, and I am going to get my rennet ready. So I've got 1/4 cup of cool water here, and I've got my rennet. This is from the New England cheesemaker, and for each gallon of milk that I have, I'm going to add 1/4 teaspoon of rennet. So I am adding 1/2 teaspoon of rennet for my 2 gallons of milk. I'm going to mix that in there. So a little backstory on rennet and how cheese making was discovered is that years ago they would use calf stomachs as pouches, right? As pouches to carry their milk in. And as they rode across the desert all day with the milk in the calf stomach, it turned to cheese. It would coagulate. So that's what rennet is from. Rennet is from the lining of a calf's stomach, and it has to be a calf that has never had anything except milk, because it's that enzyme. They harvest the enzyme out of the calf stomach that coagulates milk. So we're just imitating a very, very natural process. So 90 degrees is the temperature of the milk when it comes out of the udder, and then what we're adding is the same enzyme that would be in the lining of the calf's stomach, and that's going to coagulate the milk. And it's important to mix this in really well, and that's why you dilute it with water, because you have a better chance of mixing it in very well when it's diluted with water. and it's at 90 degrees, so I turned my burner off, and I'm gonna stir this for a good minute. I can take this out. So now we're just gonna leave that for about 10 minutes, maybe 15, and then we'll come back and check on it. All right, now we're gonna check and see what kind of break we have. I would say that's pretty much a clean break. Yeah, that's a clean break. You can see how that has coagulated. So now it's time to cut it. And if I was making an aged cheese, I would make sure that anything I put into the milk is sanitized. But because we're not aging it, it's not so important. Let me turn this light on for you and see if that gives us more. So we're just gonna cut this into about a 1-inch grid. And then we're gonna let this set and let those curds have a chance to heal. We're gonna give that about 5 minutes. Okay, so now that we have given the curds a little time to heal, we're going to turn our burner on low and we're going to start stirring. So the very first thing I'm going to do is going to start stirring them in layers to cut them this way. Because, you know, I cut them this way, all vertical. So now I'm going to stir in a horizontal pattern to cut the curds horizontally. So what we want now is for all the curds to be approximately the same size. You can see these long ones here. I'm just going to use my spoon and cut those. You want the curds to be approximately the same size throughout the pot because that means they'll all be ready at the same time. So it takes the larger curds a longer time to release their whey. So we want them to be approximately the same size. So hang on, you're crooked. So two things that cause the curds to release the whey that's within them, and that is heat and stirring. So we're just going to keep our heat on low. There's no need to take the temperature of it at this point. And we're just going to keep stirring. And I'm going to keep finding the bigger ones and I'm going to break them up. And I'm going to make sure to get to the bottom where the heat is and bring those curds up to the top so they don't start sticking together on the bottom. You don't have to do this with your hand. You can continue to do it with a spoon. And also, I would never put these curds back in. If I were making an aged cheese, I wouldn't pick up curds from the stovetop and put them back in because of contamination. Okay, make sure you're reaching to the bottom to get the curds from the bottom, because that's where the heat is, and they will stick together faster if they get too hot. They'll actually stick together before they release their whey, and they'll trap whey within themselves, and then they won't ever stick together as well. And the more whey that your curds release, the heavier they'll get, and they'll sink to the bottom. Here you can see how they start sinking when I'm not stirring them. And I can always tell which cow's milk I've got, because our Normandy Jersey cross, the black and white cow, whose name is Norma, she has a much higher yield when it comes to cheese making. So I've got less whey and more curds when I'm using her milk. And I know that is a casein. It's probably a beta casein variety. And it would probably be on her papers if I go check. And those cows are preferred for cheese making, and I can tell why, because you get a higher yield. However, Brenda, our Jersey, she is preferred for her cream, because that's why we get so much butter, is because we also have a Jersey. Norma has less butter, less cream on her milk, but she makes better cheese, or more cheese. So that's why I love both of them. Now, we've got 2 heifers coming up, and my rule is we can't have more than 2 milk cows. So in the next couple years, we will probably be getting rid of a couple cows and just keep our favorites. But such is farm life when you have milk cows. So like I said, I'm not going to give you a temperature or a time until you get to the next stage, because every cow's milk is different, and every cheesemaker's how you learn is a little different. So I'm just going to show you what stage you need to get to next. And I'm just keeping my burner, I've got it on low, because stirring and heat is what makes your curds release their whey, and they'll also shrink. So they're shrinking quite a bit. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to turn my burner off, because I want all the curds to sink to the bottom, because I want to remove some of this whey, because that'll just make the next part easier, and it'll keep me from making a mess. So I'm going to turn my burner off, but they'll still stay warm, because the bottom of the pot is has a real heavy bottom. So anytime you're making cheese, or even when you're canning, I know you've heard me say this in my canning videos, you want a bottom, you want a stock pot that has a real heavy bottom, because what that does, it distributes the heat more evenly, and it keeps your things from scorching, and it just gives you less room for air, because the heat is distributed evenly and you don't have to scrape the bottom to keep it from scorching. So always use a heavy bottom stock pot for canning. Anytime, I won't buy a stock pot that has a thin bottom, and I'm going to show you a trick here. So almost all the pots and pans that I use in my kitchen are thrifted, and when I thrift them, I don't look at the brand as much as I do this. You can tell that one has a real heavy and thick bottom, and it's going to be a good pot, and it's not going to scorch your things. And I don't have any thin bottom stock pots, but if it's a pot that you should leave at the thrift store or not buy, it'll have more of a ring because it's thin. And a pot that has a real thin bottom is only for boiling water. That's it. Because everything else is going to scorch in it. So next I'm going to get I'm like a large casserole dish. And I'm going to put some of this warm whey in here. Because I need this to keep my curds warm. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my oven on warm for a couple minutes. I'm just going to tuck this in there. That's for the future. Now I'm going to remove some more of this whey because it'll be easier to work with and I won't make such a big mess. You can see how far my curds have sunk to the bottom. Just going to remove whey until I start seeing the curds like this. And then I'm going to continue stirring. I'm going to turn this back on low. So what you're looking for now is for your curds to, and you take a small handful, for them to stick together. See how they're still popping out there? So they're not quite ready. You want them to stick together. They're just not quite ready because they're still popping out. You stir for a few more minutes. And you can see how they're sticking together a little more. They're still popping out a little bit. But you can make a nice curd from them. So I'm just going to keep stirring a little longer. And I can feel the curds start to change. I can feel them start sticking together. So they're sticking together quite well now. I can shape them. They stick together, so I'm going to turn my burner off and give the curds a couple minutes to settle to the bottom again. So as your curds, when your curds have started settling to the bottom again, you can remove some more whey. So there I can see the top of my curds. So I'm just going to press them down, get them all together on a pile. And then, here's where I want them. So I'm going to take my piles of curds. And I'm going to press them all together. You can strain your whey if you want to. I usually just catch all the curds, or most of them, with my hands. Okay, so I've shaped this into a nice log. And I've got warm whey in there. You want to keep this warm, and that's why we turned our oven to warm. Now the warm on my oven says 170 degrees, but I don't want it that warm. I just turned it on for a couple minutes just to get it between 80 and 90 degrees. And then we're going to put this in that warm oven. We're going to set our timer for 10 minutes. So we're going to flip that whole log of cheese curds every 10 minutes for 40 minutes. So we're going to do that 4 times. So after every 10 minutes, you're going to just take your log of cheese and turn it over. Okay, so now that we put that log of curds back in the oven, we're gonna set the timer for another 10 minutes. And remember, if you're using a timer like this, you have to turn it past 30 to wind it. So past 30 and then back to 10. So we're gonna turn this to 10 minutes. And then, normally I dump all the way to the pigs. But today, I'm going to use the whey and turn it into caramel. Like a caramel sauce, because we're getting a little low on maple syrup, and we like to put that in our coffee and things like that. So I'll have some caramel syrup on hand, and we'll use that in some places where we would use maple syrup. So I've got all the whey in here. I strained out any extra curds that were in there, and I had those for a snack. And now I'm going to reduce this until it's about half this amount. So I'm just going to bring it to a simmer. And as it simmers, the water will evaporate, and the sugars that are in here will become more concentrated. So I'm going to be here in the kitchen for the next couple hours. So I'm just going to simmer this until it's reduced to about half. And then, of course, I turned my back. I got busy with writing, and this whey boiled over and made a big mess on the stove that I had just got done cleaning. But I am not going to be too hard on myself, because guess what? I always clean up 100% of my own messes. I don't depend on anybody else to clean up my messes, and I am just a messy cook. That's all there is to it. When I have a lot going on in the kitchen, there's going to be messes. Some of us are just that way. Okay, friends, it has been 40 minutes. And that means our curds are done cheddaring. And we're gonna cut them. So I'm gonna get my curds out of this pan, let them rest here for a minute. I'm gonna save that whey for the pigs. So they are gonna get a treat after all today. And we're gonna cut these into curds. And you can see how much this loaf shrank from the time we put them in there. So just flipping them while they're warm and resting also help them release a lot more whey. So now I'm going to add about 2 teaspoons of salt. I'm going to mix them together well with the salt. So now I'm just going to cover them up with a cloth and allow them to absorb that salt. I'm just going to let them sit on my counter for the rest of the day. Probably by the time the kids come home and are ready for a snack, whatever they don't eat, I'll then transfer to the refrigerator. Meanwhile, this whey over here is behaving much better now, and it's reducing quite nicely, and you can see that a skin kind of develops on top because I turned it down really, really low. I did this because our daughter and grandson came over and I knew I would be distracted, so instead of simmering it, I just turned it down really, really low. If you keep your whey simmering, it shouldn't develop a skin, but anytime that you see that it's developing little pieces like this, I just scoop them out with a strainer. So now that my whey is reduced to half, I'm adding my sugar. A rule of thumb for me is I add 1 cup of sugar for each quart of whey that I began with. So I began with 2 quarts of whey, so I'm adding 2 cups of sugar, and we're gonna just continue simmering it, or turning it low. The higher you turn it, the more it needs to be watched, but also the faster it'll turn to caramel.
Where'd they go? Are the uncles and her dad here? Look, there's Harrison. There's Harrison. He's like, where are you?
Winston Joel?
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Hey, boys. You guys are fine. Maria Hopkins. She's teaching us to crochet. Oh, fun.
I'm really bad.
Oh, the same one.
Six, seven, 8, 9, 10.
Okay, back to finishing our caramel sauce, and 2 ways that I check if it's ready, and that's if the bubbles string together and you can see that it's becoming a little bit syrupy. And also it'll leave a coating on your spoon like this. It'll puddle at the edge of the spoon and kind of coat the spoon. It just starts becoming a little bit thicker. And then you're gonna add 1 tablespoon of butter for each quart of whey that you started with. So I'm adding 2 tablespoons of butter to mine. I also add 1 teaspoon of vanilla per each quart of whey. So for me, that's 2 teaspoons of vanilla. When the butter's all melted, I'm just gonna remove my caramel from the burner, from the heat, and I'm gonna take my immersion blender and blend it up real quickly because I had little pieces of milk and milk solids and things floating around in there, and I know the family will be more pleased if it is very smooth. Isn't it good?
What are you going to use that for?
We put in our coffee and stuff like that.
Okay. Because this is not usually helps lose the
Okay. So now that the caramel sauce is all done, I am going to put the cheese curds in the refrigerator, and the family will put them in their lunches tomorrow. And I will be back and show you what we do with the leftover cheese curds. We're going to fry them up Wisconsin style and serve fried cheese curds. So now we're getting ready to make our fried cheese curds, and this video has gotten really long again. Maybe that's my sign that I need to start making 2 videos a week. But first of all, we are gonna melt our tallow in the cast iron pan. And while that comes up to temperature, I am going to mix the batter for our cheese curds. So I'm going to start by adding 1 cup of flour, and to that 1 cup of flour, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of baking soda and then 1 egg. Next, I'm going to add clabber, and I don't usually measure my clabber. I'm sorry, I was busy and didn't think about measuring this for you. You can use cultured buttermilk, or you can also just use plain milk. I personally like to add something cultured. Yogurt would work as well. So you'll want to add enough of cultured milk or plain milk until your batter reaches like a thick pancake batter consistency. Don't forget to add your salt. I know that my cheese curds aren't super salty this time, so I know that I need my batter to be a little extra salty. So I'm adding about 1.5 teaspoons of salt to this batch of batter. And here you can see the consistency of the batter. So these cheese curds have been in the refrigerator for a couple days, so they are chilled all the way through. So I'm just going to toss them all into the batter, and I'm going to mix them and make sure there's no cheese curds sticking together.
Oh, so close. 7, 8, 9, 300.
Yeah, we gotta go to 375.
Oh,
You can let it be for a bit.
970.
All right, so it's ready?
Yep.
Okay. So then I'm just gonna take a fork and I'm gonna drop each cheese ball that's coated in batter into my hot tallow, and I'm gonna fry them until they are golden brown. And you don't have to use a cast iron pot to do this. I prefer to use a cast iron pot because I have to mess with my burner less, because the cast iron keeps the oil temperature from, fluctuating and going up and down so much.
Yeah.
Careful, it spits sometimes. You guys can go get started with those. They're best when they're hot. Yep.
Yeah.
Take them over.